Right, year 11, obviously this is your section A, what we've been practicing recently. I'm just going to go through, this is your homework piece, so I'm just going to go through and break down some of the questions, what needs to be done. Like normal, you have a go at answering yourself. In terms of the examination, it is worth, let me get my maths right, it is worth 16 marks, okay, so that roughly gives you don't want to spend any more than 20 minutes on section A, okay, so you need to make sure you spend about 20 minutes on section A. So when we open up like normal, you've got your 4-mark question, okay, so describe 2 features of the use of, in this case it's Thomas Splints. Okay, it can be a number of different things, okay, but this will always remain the same. Describe 2 features of the something, okay. Just remind ourselves about Thomas Splints. It is that it was created as a way to transport patients who had a fractured leg, okay. So when it was created, the idea was when people injured or fractured the leg, it was a closed fraction, and when you were moving that body or that person who was injured, the fracture would become an open fracture. That means it's pierced the skin, what caused a lot of blood loss. With the Thomas Splint, it was a cage which went around the limb or arm, whatever in general, and it provided support to stop it from moving, okay, because it kept in such a rigid position. It meant that when they were transporting that injured soldier, it would not go to an open fracture from a closed fracture, okay. So it was used when for the type of injuries which were fractures, so that could be one feature. And when you could describe how it would look, so you could talk about how it was encaged around the limb to stop the chance of becoming an open fracture and causing more injury or death from blood loss, okay. In the exam, you don't want to spend no more than 5 minutes, okay, and you need to make sure you follow the pattern, which is point evidence, okay. We spoke about this before. You'll literally write no more than 2 sentences probably for each feature. The one thing you can't do is put 2 features in one box and think you can get the marks. It clearly stipulates, when you look here, it says feature 1, it says feature 2. You need to make sure that you give me 1 feature here, 1 feature there. Some sentence starters you could use are very much simply a feature of, and then the other one you use is for example, okay. So make sure that you are following that pattern. You don't need to write much more than that. You'll end up writing about 2 sentences for each, 2 sentences for feature 1, 2 sentences for feature 2, okay. In total you've got 5 minutes, okay. It's point evidence, and that's all you should spend on that question. Right, we turn over to our favourite type of question. Obviously, how useful are sources A and B for an inquiry into some form of inquiry. This time it's talking about gas attacks, okay. As it clearly states here, explain your answer using the sources A and B and your own knowledge of the historical context. Remember, the key message here is historical context. Doesn't mean the knowledge needs to be specific, okay. Doesn't need to be complicated. It needs to know a bit about the time period. Because like we said before, you've got 8 minutes. I would say in the exam you want to spend no more than 12 minutes really on this question. If you can do it in 12, that's absolutely fantastic. Remember, you have to use sources A and B in 2 separate paragraphs. Right, we're going to write down the sentence starters we would use and the format of the question to make sure we can all answer it. We should be really in the flow at the minute of this question. So remember, the first thing you do, the point of it, you say the source is useful towards the inquiry. Like we always say, you then need to use the source, so insert a quote. So the source states / shows, then you add that after there, it'd be a quote or whatever it might be. Next bit is to my knowledge. So what do you know? Remember, that relates to the historical context. Then you explain it. This makes The source useful because. Remember, you need to refer to, this one's all about gas attacks. So make sure you refer to that as you look at it. Okay? So it refers to gas attacks, and that's what you need to focus on in this answer. Okay? Oh, it's got a bit blurry. There we go, perfect. So, once you've done that, you have to do that for source A. For source A and B. Okay? If you have time, you do the provenance. So, remember what the provenance is. What is the source? When was it created? Where is it from? So, the bit to start with is the provenance. What is the source? When was it created? Okay, if you follow that pattern, again, you get your marks. And you then tell me usefulness. The source is useful because, and then you link that to what you speak about here. So if it's, remember, if it's from created in 1916, it's created from the time period, it's a written account from someone who was there first hand. That's why it's useful, so they can give a real detailed view about what happened. If it was about a period, say for example, it was writing about events happened in 1917, but it's not been written up until 1930, the source is limited because obviously the person who's writing up from memory might forget key things. Okay, but you only do that if you have time. The source is limited because. That's the pattern you need to make sure you're following, okay? So you follow that pattern, you'll score really high marks, okay? Remember what we said, this bit at the top needs to be done first for A and B in two separate paragraphs. One's about source A, one about source B. If you have time, do these bits at the bottom, okay? My advice would be make sure you secure the 5 out of 8 marks. Then when you have time, if you've got time near the exam, go back and get those 3 extra marks. Okay, remember, you capped at, by doing the source and the A and B, you capped at 5 out of 8. To get those additional 3, you have to do a bit of work. Okay, secure the 5 out of 8, that's important. Okay, when we just quickly, before we move on to the final question, we'll just quickly look at the sources. Like I said before, I always put at the top what I'm looking at. This is all about gas attacks. Okay, again, it's quite open. Remember, this bit here is your provenance. That's what you're looking at. Okay, so that comes into play when you do provenance. You can't refer to that when you talk about the content, which is the first part of the question. So, when we got to the ambulances, we heard about the recent gas attack. A huge greenish cloud of smoke with a yellowish top had rolled down the German trenches. Only 60 men out of 1,000 survived the attack. Later, I saw some of those who had been affected. 2 of them were still conscious but gasping for breath, their faces discoloured, and they were about to die. I hope they didn't have long to wait, poor chaps. Then we saw many of the severely gassed men who arrived at hospital this morning. It was a terrible business. One man's face was dark blue with every cough. He coughed up a thick stream of discoloured phlegm. He was too busy struggling to breathe to bother much about anything else, a most horrible form of death. So the things I might pick out of: 2 of them were still conscious but gasping for breath, their faces discoloured, they were about to die. Okay? Because when we talk about this, the bit of extra knowledge I know is that they use something called mustard gas. Okay? And you would die from suffocation because it was destroying the lungs of these soldiers. So it would destroy the lungs, so they mean they can't get oxygen into the body effectively. So a lot of them died from suffocation. Mustard gas was one of the gases used during these attacks. Okay, so for source A, I would refer to this idea, talk about the way the patients would die. Why is it useful? It tells you exactly how they would die. Or it will tell you a bit about the symptoms, what would come from those attacks. Either or will be a fine way of talking about it. Okay. So then, if we look at source B, again, gas attacks at the top. Again, that's your provenance. Like we say all the time, an image only tells us a bit of a story of one event. Also, it could be staged. This is a photograph taken in 1918. Sorry, it shows British troops waiting for treatment at an advanced dressing station after a gas attack. Okay, so this is a bit more complicated, but as you can see, they have bandages around their eyes. Okay, so the reason they're waiting to receive treatment, obviously they haven't got it on the lungs because they're standing, but also tells you another form of symptom, but also tells you how they will treat it. Okay, so it would be treated at advanced dressing station. So it tells you a little bit about it there. You also can see how they managed to transport people suffering from gas attacks. Obviously, if the gas goes in the eyes, it can blind you or damage your eyesight. So transport of injured gas victims is done by people who are transport injured gas victims by lining them up and moving them as a group. Okay, so there'd be something to think about there. That's quite a bit more difficult one, but it's just something to think about there. Lining them up, transporting them because their eyes have been damaged by the gas. Okay, so they can't see. So you transport them as a line. The person at the front of the line can see. That's what I would take from it. Right, the final question, like we spoke about before, we've been practicing this quite a bit. So this is very much a skill type question. Detail the source A that I would follow up. So pick out the quote. I would use the quote you've already used. Okay. Question I would ask needs to relate to gas attacks. Okay. So if I use the quote there from source A, sorry, it's a bit faffy. If I use the quote from source A, two of them were still conscious but gasping for breath, their faces discoloured and they were about to die. So if I could use that quote again, you can pick out anything you want from there. You could pick out, then we saw many severely gasping who arrived at the hospital this morning. So that could be your quote. So if I take that as for example, then the question I might ask, how they treat gas attack victims. Okay, what type of source would I use? Let me be clear with this. I don't want to see TikTok, don't want to see BBC website. It has to be a relevant historical source, something from the time period. So for example, we spoke about this before. I might put RAMC records. I might put a surgeon's diary. I might put a doctor's diary. Okay, it might be a doctor's diary who worked at an advanced dressing station. It might be a surgeon's diary who had worked at an advanced dressing station or a hospital. Okay, it could be anything along those lines. It just has to be specific. You don't want to put TikTok, BBC, website, anything modern, something from the time period. Okay, how might this help answer the question? Well, the source would provide information from a person who was a first-hand witness from the time period. Okay, so remember, look at how I've written it. You can literally write those two will be the same for for any sort of question you talk about. Okay, any question that comes up, could be gas attacks, could be anything. That's what could come up. Okay, you can use those 2 there, and you'll get 2 out of 4 straight away. Okay, but like I said before, this is all skill. The first part, yeah, you need to know it's worth 4 marks. You need to know a bit of basic knowledge. But like normal, you've got 20 minutes in the exam. If you score at least above 12 out of 16, you're on your way to get a really good result. Okay, but you need to make sure you get those easy marks, guys. Okay, it's all about the skills for that how useful question. It's all the skills for the last question as well. Can you do that in a time condition? Right, you've got 20 minutes. Make sure you stick to the time limit and you try your best. Okay, but let's see what we can do. You have 20 minutes. Thank you.